Tonight, it's a Washington, D.C. divided. That's been the status quo for a while now, but this time it's not one of the usual suspects at the center of it all. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrived in Washington last night. And today, a day ahead of a controversial appearance before Congress, he spoke to the largest pro-Israel lobbying group in the nation.
Iran envelops the entire world with its tentacles of terror. This is what Iran is doing now without nuclear weapons. Imagine what Iran would do with nuclear weapons.
That alarming message and what it means for Israel is one the Prime Minister has delivered many times before. But it's also making ongoing U.S. negotiations with Iran a lot more difficult. Joining me now for more on this is Jim Walsh, an international security analyst with an expertise in Iran's nuclear program. Jim, thanks for being here.
Good to see you.
So I got to ask you at the outset about something the Prime Minister said today that seemed intended to kind of take the temperature down in advance of this appearance before Congress. He talked about not misconstruing the message that is being sent by his arrival here in the U.S. Let's take a listen to how he put it.
All righty.
My speech is not intended to show any disrespect to President Obama or the esteemed office that he holds. I have great respect for both.
So fact check that for me. Does he in fact have great respect not just for the presidency but for President Obama?
Well, there's certainly been rumors of tension between the two, but there have actually, truth be told, there have almost always been tensions between Israeli prime ministers and American presidents, Republican and Democrat, going back for years. But in this particular case, if the president of the free world tells you shouldn't come and give this speech, and the national security advisor says you shouldn't come and give this speech, and then you show up and give the speech, well, then, yeah, I think you're probably going to be seen as being disrespectful.
Okay, so why did Prime Minister Netanyahu, despite those requests, those urgings not to come to Washington, why did he go ahead and do it?
Well, I think we can imagine that there might be two reasons. One, he's in the middle of a hard-fought election campaign back home in Israel, and every time there's an image of him on TV in commercials and in news coverage giving a speech before Congress, that can't hurt.
So is this good for him domestically?
I would think so, absolutely. It also allows him to keep the focus on Iran, which is what he'll be talking about in the speech, rather than domestic scandals and domestic issues, which are more the focus in Israel during this election season. Secondly, I think he is authentically trying to kill the Iran deal. And really, the only way he could possibly do that is somehow try to play to Congress and get them to do it for him. So I think both political motivations and policy motivations are probably in play.
What is your take on what the U.S. is trying to do right now with Iran? Are we taking the right approach, trying to prevent them from acquiring nuclear weapons capability, or are we, as Prime Minister Netanyahu says, doing it wrong?
All right, the first thing I'd say is this is not an Obama-Iran deal. This is an internationally negotiated agreement. It includes Britain, France, Germany, Russia, China. Okay, this is the international community here. And I think they are on the right track. Even the Bush administration tried to have a position back in 2003 of zero enrichment when Iran had 164 centrifuges. And that collapsed. And what happened? Iran built 20,000 centrifuges. So going in at the end of the Bush administration, all the way through, it's been a consistent position on the part of the international community and the U.S. that this negotiation would allow Iran to keep some of its centrifuges, some of its enrichment capacity in return for enhanced inspection, restrictions, limits, all the rest of it. I study countries who start down that path and then stop and reverse course. This is how you do it.
So you don't think that we're taking the wrong approach with the rest of the world signing on? You think this is the smart way to go?
I think in fact it's our best alternative. And that's one of the thing I would say to the Prime Minister is, what's your alternative? Because if there's no deal, then what happens? All the restrictions that are applied right now under the interim agreement, the so-called Joint Plan of Action, they go away. Those IAEA inspectors, they don't have access. And then you have an unconstrained nuclear program in Iran, and you deal the moderates a death blow.
Is it possible that Prime Minister Netanyahu actually wants that he wants to sort of push tensions with Iran to a breaking point where maybe the U.S. and others take military action?
Well, that's certainly, some have speculated that that's the case, that he would have preferred that, although he himself did not take military action after threatening to do so all these years. Alternatively, some have argued that this is in his political interest. I think Avner Cohen argued that today in an op-ed piece.
Existential threat next to
As long as he's talking about Iran, he's not talking about the Palestinians. Right. He's not talking about X, Y, and Z. So this has been a winner for him over 8 years.
I also want to ask you about something that Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, had to say today. She talked about how, despite this fight over Netanyahu's appearance here, the U.S.-Israel relationship is a durable one. Let's take a listen to how she put it.
Our commitments to our partnership with Israel are bedrock commitments, rooted in shared fundamental values, cemented through decades of bipartisan reinforcement. This partnership should never be politicized, and it cannot and will not be tarnished or broken.
Is she describing things as they are, or is it possible that this whole episode has, in fact, tarnished U.S.-Israel relations?
Oh, it's a little bit of both. I think this episode has ripped the fabric in the relationship. And you'll notice she got a little line in there about not be politicized.
Right.
Remember, it is essentially the Republican head of the House,
John Boehner,
in collusion behind the president's back, without notifying him and without notifying Democrats in the House or Senate, that arranged this thing in the first place.
Over the course of about 2 weeks, right?
And when the U.S., Israel's ambassador to the U.S. is a former American political operative who worked for the Republican Party. So I think there's frustration by Senate and House Democrats that they've made this partisan. But I think her core point is correct, right? This relationship is frayed. It could get worse. I think that would be bad for both parties, and Israel needs to think very carefully about that. But I think it will continue. Odds are it will continue. And frankly, on the issue of Iranian nuclear weapons, we have the same interest. Neither the U.S. nor Israel want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. The only question is how best to achieve that shared goal.
All right, let's leave it on that somewhat upbeat note. Jim Walsh, thanks.
Thank you.